Thanks for joining us. This is now our 14th meeting. Hard to believe. Thanks for your continued participation and continuing to share your thoughts and experiences and observations as we continue the work of the CAUTAC. Today, we are going to continue our discussions around planning for urban growth boundary expansion areas. Looking forward to your participation both in the meeting itself and also via the Miro board, which Karen is going to post that link so folks can drop comments in there as well. Just a reminder, last week we talked about urban growth expansion areas and how to plan for complete communities. We talked about accommodating affordable housing needs, and we touched briefly on urban growth expansion areas and their compatibility with farm and forest activities. Just a quick note, today we are going to talk about how housing production strategies can help communities accommodate needed housing in UGB expansion areas. So kind of continuing that conversation from last week. We are going to talk about the potential for using annexation criteria and agreements to support ONA policies. And then finally, how urban growth management agreements can support affordable housing and complete communities. There's our agenda right there. I do want to welcome and thank three special guests that are with us today. We have Shannon Vilhauer, who is the Executive Director for Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. We have Jessica Blakely, who is the Director of Development and Strategy at the Salem Housing Authority, and I believe both of them have been involved in the NATTAC. And then we have Brandon Goldman, who's the Director of Community Development for the City of Ashland. So thanks to the three of you in advance. And with that, I believe Karen is going to introduce our focus area for the day and questions from the Racial Equity Framework.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we'd done this one yet. I can't remember, going back a ways, but as we think about expansion areas in the racial equity framework, I think historically we've seen some challenges to realize equity as we think about it in the context of ONA providing greater choice, affordability, and diversity of housing types. And I thought it would be really timely to bring this up as we're talking about what does complete communities look like, how do we best utilize land in expansion areas, and what do we bring to bear on that land. So I've brought this topic forward, and let's take a look at the next slide and see what we have in our framework around restorative justice. So we're looking at how this is operationalized within our local policies and growth management programs, and understanding that while local governments may be challenged, hindered, or limited, or otherwise bringing true restorative justice, I think the underlying goals of the ONA are to really look at reparative work that we can do in areas where we can take accountability. And I think it was our LCDC Commissioner Lazo, who serves on the NATTAC, had shared with the group three components around restorative justice. The identification and responsibility that jurisdictions can take, knowing that injustices around housing has occurred in their community, and that as a government agency, they are responsive to restoring choice, affordability, and access to housing and opportunity to housing, but engaging those communities in their area, in their jurisdiction around problem solving, solutions, policies that can bring about greater accessibility, affordability and choice, and diversity in types of housing. And then thinking about, as local governments, our agency and accountability to demonstrate that our growth management plans, our housing production strategies are responsive to the needs of communities who have experienced the most harm around housing. And specifically, as we think about our contextualized housing need, as we look at these housing allocations and understanding the needs of our community, and then we look at the need for land and expanding our urbanization out to the edges, what does that look like, and how do we do our restorative work and reparative? So I wanted to go into this conversation as we think about tools to facilitate both the legal certainty and clarity and processes for UGB amendments, how we also bring about the goals of ONA to bring about greater affordability, access to housing, and greater choice for housing. I'll leave it at that. If you guys want to spend just a brief minute reading that definition that has been provided for us by Multicultural Collaborative, I'd like to enter into the discussions today with that in mind.
Thank you so much, Karen. Appreciate that introduction and considerations for us to keep in mind throughout the meeting. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to absorb that, and we're going to move to our first topic for the day, which is how can housing production strategies help communities respond to needed housing in UGB expansion areas? And Jenna's, I think, going to give us a little context to get started and introduce some of our speakers, or hand it over to our speakers.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I'll just give a brief introduction because I want to make sure we get to the meat of the discussion. But this topic, affordable housing, is really building off of particularly our last meeting where we started talking about planning for affordability in UGB expansion areas and planning for complete neighborhoods. We talked through examples in the Beaverton area as well as in Bend. And for this particular meeting, we'll be exploring more what types of specific tactics and housing production strategy actions can cities use to respond to needed housing, in particular affordable housing in UGB expansion areas. So I've asked both Shannon and Jessica, who have both been very active on the needs and production TAC, to join us as subject matter experts. And I'm thank you both for being here. And so I think without further ado, I'll ask them both to speak more about this topic. And if it's all right, I'd like to start with Shannon and then Jessica. But please take it away. Thank you.
Jenna, thank you so much for the invitation to join this group today. And if possible to stop, oh, thank you. I was hoping to see everyone, great. So I don't think I've met everyone who's part of the call TAC. My name is Shannon Billhauer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity of Oregon. We support all the local Habitat affiliates. There are 23 of them who are building and repairing homes across the state. So for example, Bend Redmond, Habitat for Humanity, or Lapine River, or Habitat Portland region. And actually just last month, I celebrated my 25th anniversary working with Habitat in some capacity in Oregon. I worked at the affiliate level in the Salem area and Portland area, right? So I do have some on the ground lived experience doing this work too. So I am going to ask you to contemplate coming off mute and joining me as we have a little bit of a popcorn framing conversation. So sometimes it helps me just to like, what are we trying to achieve here? And I tried to think of a setting and like a mini environment that many of us are familiar with that pulls in people from lots of walks of life. And curiously enough, what I thought of is a hospital. So when we think about all the people it takes to make a hospital go, right? This is me. I'm just going to invite you in to come off mute. Like, what are some of the professions and people we might see occupying a hospital over the course of a week?
You see nurses.
Nurses.
Admins, patients.
Patients, admin. Mm-hmm.
Food service.
I heard food service, and then Karen.
We see janitorial staff and our building maintenance staff.
Yeah.
Some kind of like clergy or religious staff.
Mhm,
friends and family of patients.
mhm.
Emergency response.
Right.
Pharmacists,
Mhm.
doctors and physicians assistants,
Mhm. Often lab work at hospitals, right? Maybe 24 hours a day. Just wanted to get our heads into like how many different people from different walks of life it really takes to make our institutions, our core community institutions function, right? And even thinking of those patients, some might have excellent health insurance, some might have really nice health insurance through the Oregon health insurance plan, right? Some people might not have insurance when they walk into the door and still be receiving much needed services. Um, any of us who've been with a loved one in the hospital, I am grateful for that food service staff, right? The fact that you can go get some fresh food while you're in that space can be like really life enhancing. So if we think about all those people, who come in and make this hospital go, being able to live within 30 minutes of it, maybe, that helps my brain to get into this complete community space. And I wanted to mention like that, again, that kind of functioning environment, right? Where we need doctors and administrators who are highly compensated, and that does good things for our tax base, right? And we need parking attendants and security agents, and we need people who are respiratory specialists and therapists, right? We need the whole community to really make it go. And when we think about annexed land to a city, like this is where my brain is. What about all those different people, right, from different walks of life, having a place to live there? And some advantages to having those, mixes of incomes could be quality of schools, right, and ongoing resource opportunities to this newly annexed territory that becomes part of a whole community's fabric. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me in that little mental exploration. I would like to share my screen, and this is a resource. I say that, and then do I see the option popping up? Let's try one more time. Oh, there it is. Yay. All right. Is that size looking pretty decent for folks here? Great. And thank you, Jenna, for sharing this link. That's a bit more up to date. So some of us, way back with the first HB 2001 and 2003, had the chance to work on these housing production strategies. And this is to say affordable housing, and in my experience, it doesn't usually happen just organically. It takes a lot of collaboration and a lot of planning, and there are things that we have seen Oregon cities and counties do that really help move the needle on making affordable housing possible as a fully part of these integrated communities, right? And so we want to reduce financial and regulatory impediments to develop needed housing, reduce impediments, right? Get barriers out of the way. And then this one, like, let's talk about this for a second. We want to create financial and regulatory incentives for development of needed housing, create incentives, and we'll get back to this in a second. Provide access to local, state, and federal resources. For Habitat for Humanity today, of all the homes our network is building across the state, 85% of them are middle density housing. I know many of us, we hear Habitat for Humanity, you picture that one single story house with picket fence around it. Not so much anymore, right? We can serve the community, more members of the community when we can put a triplex on that lot, right? When we can build a cottage cluster, when we can build townhomes and condos. So that's actually 85% of what we're building today. And that is often taking federal, state, and local fundraising resources. Tax exemptions and abatements. There's a new feature, a new opportunity coming forward. I definitely want to mention land, acquiring that land, getting it pre-development in and getting it build ready, partnerships, even with employers in the community who we're increasingly seeing lean in with us to create homes that their workers can afford to live in, as renters and home buyers, and other inventive ideas we probably haven't even thought of yet. So there's, I'm not going to scroll because personally that makes me a little bit dizzy, but that link is available for you. And there's just a list of outstanding resources that are detailed there. So again, as we think about these complete communities, just big high-level strategies, right? One is inclusionary housing incentives. So an Oregon community, some of you, if you've ever come to a NAPTAC, you've heard me mention this before, Mary Kyle and others, right? The cities of Sisters, Oregon has been like a genius of inclusionary incentives. So often when a large developer comes into a town, they need a variance. So they're going to come to the city and ask for the variance. Sisters City Council decided actually over a decade ago, right? Every single time that happens, we are only going to give the variance if the builder will include 20% affordable housing, whether it's rental or home ownership. And that is how, of all the cities in Oregon, actually a huge percent of the population of the town of Sisters is living in Habitat for Humanity homes. You would never know that because they exactly match the communities where they're built, right? There's an agreement here that you're going to make the exterior of the home match. The super $750,000 home and the Habitat home, they're going to look very similar from the outside. If it needs to have a 2-car garage, great, we're going to do it for a free lot. And that strategy has worked really well. And again, Sisters, they've been like super geniuses. It's working for rental homes as well as home ownership. And one of those advantages is having access to high opportunity communities and land that we wouldn't be able to get a toehold in otherwise, because that's one of our biggest costs. Another strategy that works for getting a high volume of affordable homes developed is density, right? So those are almost like they're advantages to each, and they're both good approaches. But we need a place. We need a place for building those homes at density. And to hang out in Central Oregon for a minute, high praise to Deschutes County. The county has been so progressive at releasing land that they own for the purposes of affordable housing development in Bend, in Redmond, in Sisters, and in La Pine. In all of those communities, the same county, right, has actually leveraged ARPA resources and other opportunities through the years to unlock large parcels that they have held for the purpose of affordable housing development. And sometimes those parcels are even large enough that we can partner together. So in La Pine, for example, Home Forward, who is used to doing large developments, right, came in to build apartments near the senior center. Habitat for Humanity, La Pine, Sun River, smaller staff than Redmond, advocated successfully with the city of La Pine to get townhomes put into the city code. And they partnered with Home Forward, who put uniform infrastructure in for the whole site, right? But then Habitat is building those townhomes in this high opportunity, mixed income, newly developed area of La Pine. The county had to get in there, right? The county had to get in there to make that possible. Other ways that today I am seeing cities like really collaborate to make affordable home ownership go, because that's my wheelhouse. Jessica will talk to you more about rental because she's got a better bandwidth there. Grand Ron Valley Habitat is our last volunteer run affiliate in the state, and they are very geographically isolated in LaGrande, Oregon. Thank goodness, the city of LaGrande has really thought about how are we going to incentivize more housing production in our city? Like, how are we going to do that? And they've really come up with super progressive cottage codes, middle housing codes that they have voluntarily already implemented. But wait, there's more. So this volunteer run affiliate has owned land for quite some time where they thought they could build 4 homes. And to be able to unlock all of the permits, it used to be that the city wouldn't even let them start one home until they did this little tiny cut through to the through street there to add those 4 homes to this existing neighborhood. They had to do this cut through street before they could even get started. Oh my goodness, things have changed, right? And thank goodness we're partnering with a local modular home builder who's been working with the city, who informed us about these important changes, right? Because again, volunteer run affiliate, it's hard to stay on top of everything. So we're partnering with the modular home builder and the city of LeGrand. It looks like we're now talking about putting 11 to 12 homes on the same site that we thought could accommodate 4. They're going to let us start working on the lots. We can get permits today. We just about have our plans done on 2 3-bedroom, 2-bath modular homes that are going to come into existing Habitat homes next door, right? We're going to be able to do that while the city puts in the cut through and does the curbside improvements. They're going to actually front end absorb that cost. And granted, we're a nonprofit developer, but still amazing, and let us pay them off as we sell the homes with single tranche payments. What? That is a game. Like, now we're just going. And the site that's set vacant for years and like kind of a blessing in disguise because now we can build more densely, right? I mean, modular homes, I think we're going to be done in like 24 to 30 months with 12 homes. What? You know, we can only do that because of the city of LeGrand's deep and willing partnership with us. Another just example, which is, you know, it may not sound like a game changer, but it's a game changer. Columbia County Habitat for Humanity was able to acquire a 10-home site in Scappoose, also in an existing neighborhood. It was previously held by another nonprofit. This 10-home townhome site has just been vacant for over a decade in an existing neighborhood because, and this will probably sound like a familiar story, the water and sewer lines have been at capacity. And they're working with the city on timing. The city wants them to wait to do replacement until they're doing replacement too, right? And by collaborating deeply in that way, it's going to be a better quality and cheaper for all parties. So those are just a couple examples of cities and counties going the extra mile in ways that are really helping us to get more done. A new tool that's just starting to come online, I think this coming spring, but I wanted to mention, it was part of Senate Bill 1537, passed last session. It now has a new acronym because we love acronyms. MRRL, the Middle Income Revolving Loan Fund. In my language, it's a rolling tip district. So the idea is, right, if a housing developer is coming in and they're going to be building rental or home ownership serving up to 120% AMI, but as low as it needs to be, a city can first has to like pass an ordinance saying, yep, we want to participate. A city can access part of this $75 million approved already by the legislature for infrastructure, right, to help get that going in collaboration, usually with a nonprofit developer, and get things underway. And then the city to repay that loan over time. I think there's some technical fixes pending, so this may even get easier. But again, as I understand the bill, and I see Alexandra smiling, who was just in the same meeting about it, the city is going to forgo basically 10 years worth of the improved vertical improvement tax value to repay the loan up to that long. But right, sometimes just getting that infrastructure in is the holdup to getting these developments going. So that's going to be a really key, exciting new resource that I think we'll get to soon add to the housing production strategies. So much more good to talk about, but I want to pause there and make sure that Jessica shares some really important rental collaborative opportunities as well. Thanks.
Shall I hop in?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
great.
Please do.
And thank you, Shannon. Yeah, I think we can jump in.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Blakely. I'm the Director of Development at Salem Housing Authority with our focus of development of affordable rental housing. We primarily work within the city of Salem and the city of Kaiser. Those are our jurisdictional boundaries, but we often partner with our neighboring housing authorities, West Valley Housing Authority serving Polk County and Marion County Housing Authority serving Marion County up into the Canyon. So I said my focus really is on the city piece because that's what I'm most familiar with, but I'm happy to answer any questions with regards to some of the things I've experienced in the rural partnerships that we have as well. Some of the tactics that we have asked of our city is land banking. Land banking is so huge right now for us because oftentimes being a government entity or a quasi-government entity, it takes us a long time to purchase land and trying to find funds for acquisition are a bit challenging. Many times if we're utilizing state or federal resources, we're required to do full NEPA level environmental reviews, which can take, 6 months to a year. So what we've asked of the city of Salem just last week and is something that they're considering is we have a piece of land nearing an adjacent development, and to bring this development up to code, we need a new fire line. So to be because of the updated fire code here in the city. That's going to cost the project roughly $150,000 of infrastructure improvements just to move a fire hydrant or get it closer to the main arterial road of Market Street, which is our main road that kind of splits Salem. The land that they would bank, they could provide us an easement so that we could get the 8-inch line through that parcel to our parcel. And they can still utilize that land for a future affordable housing development or something else, whatever the city decides. So we've asked them if they would utilize some of their own bond funds to purchase the land, and if they would consider the easement basically a gift to us. And it's things like that that are so important to our developments. When you don't think of, I guess I don't think about $150,000 being a very expensive piece in a multi-million-dollar development. But the more and more of those there are, the more it becomes not feasible to build the project in general. And so that is something that's been a huge partnership with the city of Salem is what can we do? How can you help us with any land that's available out there? We have also asked if they could purchase it and set it aside, whether it's us that gets it or a nonprofit that gets it in that location of where that vacant land is, just happens to be on a major arterial road, close access, like on the transportation line itself, which takes right up through the center of Salem. And to me, when we think about climate strategy, getting people close to transit that are low income, because many times they can't afford a vehicle. This is like a perfect goal of ours. So, hey, city, while we don't have any feasibility work done on the land right now, is this something that you can do for us so that we can at least offer it up to the community as an affordable piece of land? And that can be done through deed restrictions or what have you. A cool thing that they're doing is the single use or a single area URA. And so in order for us to make one of our projects pencil, they actually brought the piece of land into, it's kind of, and it looks like a little hammer, but it comes off of an actual existing URA. But it grabs that parcel in there and makes that available for use of urban renewal funds. And, we get to the end of a project and something happens like it always does. There's never a perfect project, but being able to use those URA funds is also extremely helpful. In some of the nicer areas of town, so some of the more expensive areas of town, there was an Salem comprehensive plan revision which allowed for all residential zones to allow residential facilities and support non-conforming or continued use of housing. And so that really, where like former zones or the areas in those desired neighborhoods were not available to us to even look at as housing potential, we can now kind of take a peek at those. So we really like that. SDC waivers are key. I mean, they're just absolutely imperative to any type of financing that we do, because it's so tight to make an affordable housing project pencil. It just really is. And so the SDC waivers are huge. Now I understand, being out in Polk County, some of those smaller cities, SEC waivers are like practically impossible. Like they can't survive without them. So I think the use of state funds to provide to cities so that they can do that work, is an excellent way, to avoid that. So, definitely like those. And then we have about 3 different types of property tax exemption programs. There's one that's allowed under statute. So housing authorities are granted property tax exemptions under state statute. And if we partner and if we're a partner in a project, we can offer up that tax exemption. So oftentimes, if we have somebody that's coming in for an affordable housing development, the city will ping us and say, hey, do you know about this development? And we can get in touch with the local developer and see if they've heard of our property tax exemption program. Because if they're already doing affordable housing, why not help the project be more successful? And if they weren't considering affordable housing, maybe they will. And there's programs that they can only use our exemption for the percentage of units that are affordable at 80% or below. But the city has some where it's not inclusionary zoning. It's like, hey, do you want some property tax rebates for 10 years? Hey, we need you to offer a certain number of affordable units. And so that's another opportunity for a developer that doesn't want to go full affordable. We're really looking at changing to I would say probably the hardest thing for us as a housing authority is mixed use developments. And our city is very much wanting mixed use developments in our kind of our inner core. And so we've been able to be very vocal about, hey, if we do that, we need you to buy the land. Because once we get into the higher wages, because Foley's not really allowing for those split decisions right now. Once we add any type of commercial space, we're up to prevailing wage, and there's no funding available for affordable housing developments that offsets that amount. And so we really need the city and a city to partner with us and to help us, bridge that gap, because we would love to build a mixed use development. We have no issues whatsoever paying the higher wages if we have that infill of that extra source of funding. And so I'm glad that they're starting to listen to that a little bit more of like, I'm glad yes, you want affordable housing in the downtown core, but we can't build what you need if it's going to be mixed use. And then the same goes for mixed income. So the city loves mixed income, mixed use projects, especially in that urban core. But if you start to go above income averaging of 60% or below AMI, those funding sources don't exist. So while it's great in theory to say, yes, we love mixed use, mixed income, and guess what? So do we. We would love to build that. We think it's very important to have incomes at all levels in a building. We don't want to concentrate any type of poverty in any type of neighborhood. Our neighborhood associations really want to see us be diverse in the way that we put our developments out into our community. But the reality is we just can't. There's no magic fund that allows us to do this work. Under statute, we can, but OHCS prioritizes, their funding at the lowest AMI. And so, you try to get those downtown really nice buildings that, everyone would be proud to live in, but we just can't. So we're starting to see a little bit more give and a little bit more understanding with the city as we explain our financing and how it works. So if there's financial incentives, we can meet their goals. So we just got to have those financial incentives, whatever they are. Part of kind of to echo Shannon's too was the infrastructure funding for the housing development. Land readiness is what I've been screaming for quite a while. Being located only in one city, one jurisdiction, you're really limited as to what land you can touch. If any of you are kind of familiar with Salem, we've got rivers running through the middle of our city. So we've got floodplain issues. We have archaeologically significant areas in Salem. And so while there's still a lot of land that visibly looks available for development, it's practically untouchable by us. We've got a couple of brownfield areas that need a lot of DEQ work. So land readiness is really a key thing for us. And I think those are the biggest one. We have gone through a housing production strategy, and I feel very grateful to be a part of those conversations, to be able to share some of our barriers and see if there's something that the city can give as we're working on housing production. But those are really the key ones on their strategy that really are impactful to ours. And I think for any affordable housing developer in general.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Shannon. That's really helpful. I'd like to ask both the two of you, but also the rest of the group, as we kind of move into discussion a little bit here, of the various tools, great information. Thank you. And of the tools that and approaches and strategies that you shared over the last 20 minutes or so, which of those do you think are most effective or applicable, since we have a focus today on urban growth expansion areas or greenfields? Which of those strategies do you think are most appropriate there or most effective in those situations? And I'd also open it up to the rest of the group for the strategies that Jessica and Shannon described, or other potential housing production strategies. What do we think are the ones that would be most effective when we're talking about planning for greenfield or urban growth expansion areas? I don't know if Jessica, you want to go first?
Sure.
Yeah.
I could give you an example in Salem. So the city is eyeing a whole new project. It's like a marine drive. It's like creating this new marine drive in West Salem. And in that, they have banked a ton of land, and it's outside of the city of Salem right now, but within the UGB, but it keeps going from there. And that land, although it used to be farmland, is like, oh my gosh, it would be the perfect thing for affordable housing. If we could get our hands on any of that land, that would be, perfect to our mission. So land banking and land readiness, infrastructure development, all of that, those things are key for us.
Are there any, before we go to Shannon, are there any concerns, Jessica? I just wonder about the location of those lands on the edges of town for developing affordable housing, versus more central to the city, to Salem, for example.
Well, in this particular case, it's on an arterial road, so it's not. It is desirable and it does have transportation nearby, but you're right, they are further out. So we do have to consider placing affordable housing outside of those transportation spaces and coming up with solutions to that. One of the things I think about, though, when I think of new land is I've inventoried the land inside of the Salem UGB, and it's extremely costly to get it ready for development. And so I think about being able to make a project pencil when we start from scratch. And so it's not always that case, and not every case is the same, but I definitely look at it as a positive, and something that we could build a lot quicker because we don't have to do the work on the land itself to get it ready for development.
Great, thank you. Shannon.
Yeah, if I could pop in, and please forgive me, I am going to read here. I reached out to my colleague, Jackie Keogh, who works at Rooted Homes in Central Oregon. And these are her words, so I will read. We were part of the team selected to develop the 40-acre North Point Vista site in Redmond into a mixed income neighborhood project. The $140 million project aims to construct 450 units in East Redmond near the Desert Rise Industrial Park. The process is moving forward, albeit slowly. For example, North Point Vista predates HB 2001, and because of the bill, the city amended its code to allow for a planned unit development process, which helped them more easily modify standards that might not work for the goals of the development. While there had been a push to develop affordable housing first, that may not do the residents a great service because they'll be in a remote area without other resources like parks and transportations developed by their move-in date. From her perspective, from Jackie's perspective, the biggest benefit of working on a project like this with the city has been their commitment to work with Adlin and Company to master plan the site. Between the infrastructure and land donations, the project will only need one color of subsidy lift home ownership to subsidize it. Additionally, they'll be able to work with a rental provider to provide housing from 30 to 120% AMI, and then Rooted Homes is going to build mixed income communities where all households can find a home for their economic situation, and hopefully where there are opportunities for local renters to advance into homeownership through the community land trust without being displaced from their neighborhood. Thanks.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate that. Others from your experiences or development you've observed in greenfields or urban growth expansion areas, what housing production strategies might be most effective in those in that type of situation, and what might the challenges or opportunities be in our urban growth expansion areas? Go ahead, Brock.
I was actually going to tag on to a comment that Jessica had made about having, the ability to finance a project fully or, enough with other subsidies to make it pencil when it's residential, but when it's residential and commercial in the same building, then you get that prevailing wage and the increased cost. So perhaps a strategy here is saying, hey, we're going to have mixed use areas, but the buildings will be individually residential or individually commercial so that we don't run into that prevailing wage issue for the affordable housing.
So like horizontal mixed use?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay. I know others have ideas. Come on, don't be afraid to chime in. Okay. I'm not going to force it. Okay, go ahead, Mary Kyle.
Well, I'm not a builder, but nobody else is raising their hands. But I just wanted to comment on a theme I heard from both Jessica and Shannon, which is true in or outside of an urban growth boundary, but I know we're focused on like the greenfield or new land, which is the importance of land donation or land banking. They both said that the Redmond piece that Shannon just read about, that was a publicly owned 40 acres that just really cut the costs. That was from anyway, I can tell you the origin of that 40 acres, but it was county owned, donated to the city. But both of them mentioned that the importance of land donation and land banking, which are not necessarily the same thing. So, and the importance of a willing local government, even an aggressive local government, which I think Shannon mentioned, and that's not always the case. So how do we make these really great practices business as usual wherever anyone lives and is looking to develop homes, especially affordable homes and diverse homes, workforce, and however, from 120% and down for AMI qualifying. So yeah, how do we make that business as usual?
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, Mary Kyle, I think that's a great summation. How I've been thinking about that in my brain is that like we're actually asking city planning staff to make a pretty hard turn, right? To make a pretty hard turn with these housing production plans from being regulators to being really good at providing incentives. to come into the community. And if I may, you may be able to tell I like a good analogy. I was thinking about if you need a home repair, you know, you don't always go with the cheapest bid, right? Like, who is going to put on my roof? Like, let me see who's available. When can they come? What products are they going to use? Are they going to be around if something goes wrong? Are they reliable? Like, I'm going to read some reviews. I think that also I want to pitch like something to think about when you're trying to incentivize the production of affordable homes. Like, do you necessarily want someone from out of state who's like, we can do it cheaper? Bye. Or do you want someone with deep ties to the community who's been here for decades, who's going to be here, who has, you can check references on service provision after the homes get built? And that sort of mindset of like, in a sense, you're looking like you're shopping for a key paid service, and who knows how to do this affordable housing well. And sometimes it's smart to look at the whole package when you go to pick your bid. And I think and I will stop here, right? But what we're trying to get to is a place where, like, in a sense, there's going to be competition among cities to attract in high performing affordable housing developers.
I wish that all cities wanted to be part of that competition, but as Alan Lazo said, offering just incentives of like carrots and so sticks doesn't work if you're not hungry. So I want to protect planners from always being on the front lines, because it's often the elected officials or a neighborhood, right? So how do we systematize this? We're all, you know, every community is going to have, I mean, that's what ONA's doing, Housing for All. So what are the best practices? And then it's not going to be the same for all cities, but how to incentivization is definitely a part of it. But I think if we rely just on that, we won't have it everywhere.
Jessica, were you going to say something, and then we'll go to Damien?
Yeah, I was just thinking about, you know, the city of Salem in specific. I don't think necessarily that they knew all of the things that are prohibitive in affordable housing development. So I do think that there's a certain level of education and resources that are needing to be provided to the cities and counties too, of like, this is how you can help. Or, you know, since we're so tied into the city of Salem, now we're reaching out to the city of Kaiser. And I don't know the city of Kaiser. And it really is with the intent to say, hey, what do you need in your city? What do you want? And can I explore those pieces of land or some ideas that you have and maybe bring back some feedback? Because I do think there's just you don't know what you don't know. And so I feel like a valued voice at the city of Salem only because they're stuck with me. But I do think there's some education that can happen at the city county level to hopefully get them, maybe not business as normal, Mary Kyle, but maybe get affordable housing to not feel like such a scary thing for some reason. And one of the educational pieces we like to do with the Housing Authority is teach people about what affordability looks like in a person or in a position. I mean, a lot of times there's like this scary thought that affordable housing is like criminals or something. It's just like, no, it's all of us. It's all of us. And being able to break it down by those percentage levels has really put forth some good education to those people. And they're like, oh yeah, I do want my hairdresser to be nearby. Or, oh yeah, I do want the people that work and serve me in my favorite restaurant to be here. You know, but it takes that level of education to get there, I think.
Thanks, Jessica. Damien.
Thanks, Steve. I've appreciated the sharing and the discussion about land banking and infrastructure. What I want to offer is something to think about as part of this rulemaking process, which is there are things cities can do to either donate land or help with paying for infrastructure, getting infrastructure built, maybe as part of a larger capital improvement program project. But we're still living with property tax limitations under measures 5 and 50. So if we are talking about things that we want to make business as usual, we need to look at making changes to either how we raise revenue locally or see how the state can be a more significant partner for helping us buy land that could be donated or help pay for infrastructure that could be provided to an affordable housing developer.
Thanks, Damien. Important perspective. Maddie, go ahead.
Jessica, Shannon, thanks so much for joining us. I just had a birds project and the arc of those projects, including either master planning or planned unit development, and how your organizations were able to participate in components of those. We as a TAC have talked a lot about the ways that jurisdictions use master planning or the planned unit or subdivision development process as a way to ensure that certain uses are included in expansion areas or in areas that are within the UGB. I wonder if you could speak to some of the ways that you were able to assure that certain components, either affordability or certain components of those master plan developments were paid for, or there was participation by the jurisdiction. You alluded to that happening, but are there ways that you were able to secure that commitment in a way formally so that it paved the way for those projects to be successful?
Yeah, we have one project specifically located in the center of the city where we just wanted one building of this humongous master plan development. And the city was requiring right-of-way improvements to take place during key timing parts of that, which had nothing to do with our parcel, but everything to do with the timing of when we could build and when that master plan could move forward. So it really took every piece of it, because there's single family, middle housing, multifamily, residential, and then our little affordable housing parcel, a city park, and state lands. It was just really fun. But it took all of us coming together, and then also having the affordable housing piece go last was key, because we can't afford to pay for a street that we won't then own or manage. And so the market rate developer was able to get the property tax exemption by offering a certain amount of affordable units. He agreed to do the right-of-way development, which then triggered us to be able to start our project. And so by allowing us to go last and us, drawing straws to do like who's going to go first, which part's going to be done at what point. But that was the only way we moved it forward, was we were all moving together as one. So that was really key. And the city actually convened a lot of those meetings, and that could be really helpful moving forward, of the city bringing in those folks, especially when we're dealing with state surplus lands and all of those crazy nuances that get added into it. But affordable housing going last is kind of how we get it done.
Thanks, Jessica. We'll go to Alexandra, and then I think we'll move on to our next topic that Kaden's going to introduce for us.
Yeah, so kind of dovetailing into kind of what both Damien and Jessica are talking about, I think at least from the city side of things, one of the greatest barriers to kind of new housing production and things like that, especially on new tracts, things that have been added to the UGB, things that maybe are being considered to be added to the UGB, is infrastructure. Because of 5 and 50, because of just kind of a number of things, we don't really have revenue as cities to really kind of invest in those larger scale capital projects. And so it's really important. I think last session there was 100 million in infrastructure resources, but the Water Caucus currently has a survey out and only 50 cities have responded. And it's over $800 million in water and sewer and stormwater infrastructure needs that are directly tied to housing, and kind of unlocking these areas of land that, would be great to develop on. And so when we're talking about like, you know, having the affordable housing developer go last can be a great strategy, but sometimes it would be nice to not have to do that in order to unlock kind of those infrastructure needs to get there.
Great, thank you. Thanks to our speakers, and thanks for everyone for engaging in that question. And we'll just continue the conversation after a segue and introduction from Karen.
Yeah, I'll be brief in the segue, but I wanted to touch on our racial equity framework topic once again. As we think of future housing, our future population growth and our needed housing, remember that ONA asks us to really look at affirmatively furthering fair housing. And so who has influence over new housing development in an expansion area, and who has the greatest influence? Property owners, property developers, regulators. What about future residents of low-income housing? And we really look to partnerships and agencies like our housing authority, like Habitat. There's a whole network across Oregon. Housing Oregon is the name of that network. And they are the advocacy and voice for your future residents. And Shannon illustrated for us that the hospital needs its food service staff, it needs its medical technicians, its receptionists, and we want to house all of those community members, and that's their voice at this table. And so we think about production strategies that those strategies are not just for within our incorporated communities, but also in our greenfields and our UGB areas and in potential expansion areas for our UGB. And one of the production strategies that could happen, I don't know, it didn't come up yet, but it has happened, are conditioning your annexations. And I'll credit Mary Kyle, I think last meeting, she brought up, well, you know, you've kind of teetered around the subject of annexations, and we'll just blame Cassara and throw her under the bus that she's mentioned annexations more than once. And so Mary Kyle caught on to that and said, well, are annexations an issue, you know, in terms of the expediting or when we see these lands come into production and development. And so Mary Kyle, I wanted to take that one further. Are our annexations an issue? And our annexations an opportunity to meet some housing goals? And so I thought we'd have Brandon come, because this is what happens when Brandon chooses to attend a meeting with me, is I'll cling on to two things he said in that meeting, and then he has to come to another meeting. So he so graciously volunteered to share what they're doing in Ashland to advance their affordable housing goals and opportunities and challenges. Brendan, let me know if you're able to share your screen or if you need me to do that. Ingrid, if we give Brandon some sharing.
I believe I am.
All right.
Are you guys able to see that?
Looks good on my end.
All right. Well, thank you, Brandon Goldman, Community Development Director for the City of Ashland. I'm pleased to be here today, not just to share what Ashland has done, but it's been enlightening to listen to the discussions that preceded it. So, but I did want to take an opportunity to look at annexation specifically, as the, Senate Bill 1537 really does address the potential for expansions of urban growth boundary, and applying to that specific rules relating to providing affordable housing for a 60-year period. Once Senate Bill 1537 was passed, like all cities in the state, we were probably one that went and looked at all the land around our existing urban growth boundary to identify which lands would be suitable for a 50-acre expansion. Some of the preclusions in Senate Bill 1537 relate to you can't expand on to exclusive farm use or forest reserves. And on the map I'm showing presently, you'll see that the forest reserves are indicated in gray and the exclusive farm use is in that mustard color. So essentially our urban growth boundary, with the few exceptions of the blue lots, which are rural residential, it's largely surrounded by lands that we can't expand onto. But that's not new for Ashland. People in Ashland going back 30 or more years were looking at how do we accommodate our growth, and have really embarked on a strategy of growing up, not out. And how do we accommodate affordable housing in that expanded growth area? So Planners before me worked on establishing annexation criteria that specifically relate to inclusionary zoning. So we're going back 30 plus years in which Ashland adopted code provisions in our land use ordinance that stipulated that when you annex property or do a zone change in Ashland to higher intensity residential use, at least 25% of the land, 25% of the base density has to be provided as affordable housing. And over that last 30 years, we keep amending and tweaking this in response to comments that we receive from both for-profit developers and affordable housing developers to make sure that it has some flexibility and can work. Namely, one of the concerns was we had initially targeted that all the units had to be below 80% AMI, and no distinction between very low income or median income or even people up to 120. So about 8 years ago, we modified the standards to create a sliding scale. If you are providing units at 60% of the area median income, 15% of the base density would be adequate. If you're targeting higher income levels, 120%, you're looking at 33% of the units being affordable. So this does largely fall in line with what the UGB expansion rules are in terms of, 30% of the units being affordable. Additionally, we made modifications, and I won't go through them exhaustively. I know we have a limited time, but I do have the code reference there for those of you that want to dig deeper. But essentially, in 2016, I believe we went back and looked at the requirements. We had a 60-year term of affordability up until that period of time. And we were approached by Habitat for Humanity Rogue Valley as their model was looking for ownership opportunities for their clients and felt that the 60-year period of affordability was somewhat problematic for ownership. We also approached the Housing Authority of Jackson County in that discussion, and they indicated that the 60-year period of affordability for multifamily was fine because they were looking at developing products would provide that level of affordability for that period. So we modified our local inclusionary zoning ordinance and the annexation and zone change to newly incorporate those year terms. I will say there's always an interest at the city to look at things like housing land trusts or 99-year affordability, looking for generational affordable housing. But nonetheless, these are being provided not necessarily with city subsidy, although we will waive all the STCs, and in many cases, because of this annexation ordinance provision, it really does form a partnership between the for-profit developer looking to do the market rate housing and the experienced people in doing affordable housing, which is our affordable housing providers, namely in the nonprofit arena. We also require that the units that are provided be comparable in terms of the market rate units. The teacher of experience being that back 30 years ago when we had an annexation and all the townhome developments were 3-bedroom, 2 baths, and all the affordable housing units were 1-bedroom units, made us change our code back then to say, let's do commensurate bedroom sizes so that the affordable units are commensurate with what the market rate units were. We also created, again, this is probably in 2006, a requirement that affordable units be dispersed throughout the development. But then the following 2 annexations both had requests from the affordable housing partners to consolidate those affordable housing units for their economies of scale and their projects. And so exceptions were granted. But I think this is merit because we do largely small projects in Ashland. We do total number of housing units, probably 50 a year. And we've been fortunate over the last decade to have about 10% of our total housing production be affordable housing through this annexation and zone change requirement. And I wanted to give just a couple examples. 2 are pending right now. We have applications in process for a larger scale development, 210 units on the north side of town. They will be required to provide 37 units. The developer has indicated that they will build those units, which again, we look for those partnerships because of the experience and not just getting the units on the ground, but maintaining them over time. And also another smaller project of that is looking at 37 units, of which 8 units would be affordable. And again, those are all likely to be a mix of 2 and 3 bedroom townhomes or single family. But again, I think in both cases and historically, although we had that sliding scale that I initially indicated, developers almost universally have requested to provide the fewest number of units at the lowest income level, even though it has the deepest subsidy amount. You know, we had assumed as adopting the code that by giving the latitude to target higher incomes and provide fewer units, that there might be a balance struck there. But again, I think that as the evidence is shown through recent and prior applications, that 60% AMI ends up being the sweet spot where a poor market developer is not able to provide as many market rate units as they can. But in cases where Habitat might be targeting 80%, in our area, they are targeting 70% AMI. That is a case where they have an application that's approved at 80% or below. We had a recent annexation of 43 units and 8 affordable housing units, 43 market units, 51 total. And this is a case where the developer was required by our annexation code, not just to provide, they came in with a development partner, Habitat for Humanity initially, but the poor market developer was required to provide all infrastructure improvements as part of that annexation and provide, you know, essentially ready lots to the nonprofit affordable housing provider. And, you know, through this process, we also have timing requirements where 50% of the market rate units can be built, but the next 50% can't be started until at least half the affordable housing units are built. So that ended up, from the developer's point of view, being an obstacle. And they ultimately decided to dedicate the land area in order to essentially wash their hands of the requirement for affordable housing. And they sought out a number of development partners in our area, qualified affordable housing providers, of which none were in a position through negotiation to accept that land at this period of time, even though it's available and has infrastructure extended to it. But what we've recognized is that, again, in a small community, there is a development capacity issue for our partners, and they can't necessarily take on X number of projects at the same time and meet a developer's timeline to get their market rate unit portion going forward. So ultimately, in that case, the developer dedicated those lots to the city, and we'll be going through an RFP process for nonprofit affordable housing developers to, you know, put forth a proposal that they can build 2 single-family homes and 4 cottages as part of that. So that is forthcoming, and we're likely to be issuing that in February. Again, these are just a couple other developments that we've had. One's a good example in terms of the coordination between a for-profit developer and the Housing Authority of Jackson County, the Snowberry Park development. Initially, the Housing Authority had agreed to build the 17 affordable required units through our annexation. And this was right near the recession, so it's not that recent, but at that point, the for-profit portion of the development, the market rate, was stalled, and the Habitat for Humanity in the city of Ashland were able to buy the entire 10 acres of property, and ultimately, through that cooperative work, get 120 units on that property instead of just 17. So again, annexation and zone change requirements for affordable housing have probably been the most beneficial to the city of Ashland in getting affordable housing units on the ground. So these are, again, requirements, not just incentives. And we do incentivize, you know, through the waiver of SDCs, through even for market rate units, a deferral of payment of SDCs, as well as, you know, just a number of other strategies, density bonuses. We've largely exhausted a lot of those incentives, but we find that incentives alone don't really incentivize the creation of affordable housing. And so we are in the position of looking at these requirements and are fortunate that for 30 years we've had this annexation requirement. The UGB expansion requirement is newly into that arena. So the other thing I wanted to note is that in terms of master planning areas outside the UGB, I think this is an area where cities can assist property owners if there is an interest, again, in expanding into a particular area. I'm going to give a very quick example of an area that was already within our urban growth boundary, but the city undertook a master planning effort, with assistance grants funding from DLCD to do a master plan of this area, looking at all the water capacity, sewer capacity, stormwater, transportation needs, identified a transportation and pedestrian connectivity through a 91-acre area that currently only has 22 rural lots on it and some significant natural features like wetlands and creeks. But so through this process, we ultimately changed our comprehensive plan, adopted higher density zoning, master planned areas for where development could occur. Development has not yet begun out here, but now there's a framework in place for when it does happen. Ultimately, we saw a change from the prior comprehensive plan designation for this 91 acres that was going to accommodate, exclusive of the wetlands and riparian areas, probably on order of 250 units. It's now has a new comprehensive plan designation that will allow 450 units, and of which we anticipate about 110, 120 of those units to be affordable housing. And again, a mix of unit types, and these are pretty broad zones. Once it comes into the city, it will have to comply with that. So as part of that, because it's within our UGB, it's still under county standards for development. But when an annexation comes in, we've already completed the comprehensive plan amendments, the transportation system plan amendments, and have a land use ordinance in place that would facilitate the types of development that were envisioned through what was a 2-year-long planning process that, affordable housing's coming in to fill these gaps. They won't have to go back through that whole process. And that's really the presentation. I know that we're short on time, so I wanted questions, and if you have any, hopefully I can answer them.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon, for kind of taking us through how the program has evolved over time and responded to changing needs, or what kind of responded to what you've learned along the way. I'm wondering if you could share what the biggest challenges have been in regards to the annexation program, and then I would ask for folks, especially from other cities, whether they've considered similar programs and what the reasons why they have or haven't pursued them. But let's start with you, Brandon.
Yeah, I will note that because it's been such a long-standing section of code for City of Ashland, we haven't had really any developer concern over its implementation. I think it's more of a functional, how do they make those connections with affordable housing providers that are ready to partner with them and move forward on a project. And so that's probably been the largest challenge, is really aligning the timing of projects from the private developer side and the nonprofit so that timing works. And in large part, in many cases, it can't. Our affordable housing partners are working on other projects that they can't drop and pick up and start a new project just because the for market development is ready to move forward. So that had been a challenge for a number of years. Our hope is that this change to a land dedication, where they can dedicate the land to an affordable housing provider, and then there is no longer any timing issue in our code. And if it takes the affordable housing provider, 2-3 more years to secure grant funding and 2 more years to get a development plan in place, they're not holding up the market rate development, and yet they've got the security of land that is not only in their ownership through a transfer of title, and from the city's perspective, we also impose a deed restriction on it so that we know that it will be affordable per those standards. So they have the asset, and then that helps leverage getting the funding necessary for further development. And so we think we're hopeful that that becomes a solution to a problem that had come up a number of times before. But I would also say that, in large greenfield areas, to your original question, infrastructure costs have been an impediment. And when we had another annexation, which I didn't list, for I think it was about a 50-unit development, 13 units of affordable housing, we were able to provide community development block grants from the city to pay for the public infrastructure in front of that. Those 13 affordable housing units were built first, and it took years for the market rate housing to follow. It's all built out now, but it was kind of nice to see the affordable housing units go up first, and this was through the Rogue Valley Community Development Corporation, and those were all owner units, and they're all still occupied by the original purchasers, and we're going on a decade plus. So, I think every proper project has its own peculiarities that make it difficult or easy in some respects. So I don't know if I have a universal answer, but
Okay.
I would say that timing issue was a big one, and hopefully we resolved it. Fingers crossed.
Okay. These topics and conversations are great. So we're going to table the third item on our agenda, and we'll cover that next time and leave the next 7, 8, 9 minutes for to continue this conversation. Again, we got lots of hands, so we'll start with Brock.
So looking at the projects that you showed on the screen there, it seems like more or less all of them had somewhere between a 20 and 25% affordable housing requirement on average. Is that about right?
I would say that the average, because they targeted 60% AMI, they ended up more closer to 15% of the total number of units. Our code says that if you build at 100% AMI as qualified affordable housing under our local rules, not necessarily state funding or others, that would require a 25% of the number of units. So,
Shannon, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. This has been really inspiring. I just wanted to call out what you shared about deferring SDCs for even the for-profit builders. I think during this high interest rate environment in which we find ourselves, not only would a for-profit builder have to lay out that cash, they're probably paying a bunch of interest on their construction loan. So there is a huge advantage for the building community, and just thank you for taking that step.
Yeah, and on that we give, again, we adopted in our code a 1 year 0% interest loan on SDCs, or certificate of occupancy, whichever comes first. But then we established essentially up to a 10-year payback, and I think it's at a 5 or 7% interest. It's tied to whatever the current rate is. So it's less of an incentive to defer them over a 10-year period. But if somebody needed to, in order to have rents to pay the SDC, they could do so.
Sarah.
All right. Brandon, that was really interesting. I had 2 questions because system development charges were brought up. One, I was curious what conversations were with maybe your public works department, and if there was any concern about waiving and or deferring SDCs. And second, for I can't remember the name of it, but the area that the city master planned that hasn't annexed yet, I'm curious if there might be any building pressure or desire for the city to take on some of those infrastructure projects to kind of, quote unquote, unlock the area for development.
Yeah, the short answer is yes to both. The Public Works Department, obviously, they're looking at how do we accommodate future growth with the SDCs and using those funds. And so we, ultimately our Public Works Department, in looking at the affordable housing component of these projects and the density bonuses that we offer for additional market rate units, we are actually increasing total development and therefore increasing the amount of SDCs generated when compared to a project that didn't have an affordable component, didn't have the 2-to-1 market rate a density bonus that we allow for the market rate. But those studies have all been done, and obviously we were in a position to show how the affordable housing units within our community assist in terms of reduced transportation if they can live here and work here. On the second part of it, the normal neighborhood plan, in doing that transportation system plan, we did identify some of those streets that would bisect the project as being broader serving than just the neighborhood itself. And so those are eligible for systems development charge payments from the city to offset those costs. We also established what's called an advanced financing district, which would allow the city to work as a receiver of funds from future build-out. So developers paying for the build-out up front, we can tack a surcharge on every unit built in there subsequent to them, so that we can collect those funds and provide them back for the upfront costs of the developer. So, but there is a number of the main street going across the top, a main street going through the middle, a railroad crossing. Those are all broader infrastructure improvements. And there's also a sewer line going through the main area that will serve future development that, those upscaling or the city's contribution would be part of our capital improvement plan.
Martha.
Hi, thanks. I'm curious about your land dedication option. And particularly, I mean, how are you ensuring that affordable housing is actually built? Is there some sort of time put on it? I guess I'm just wondering, how do you make sure that land isn't just dedicated and it sits there?
Yeah, so in short, I don't know that we have enough history of the land dedication to show. But in terms of having it dedicated to a qualified housing provider, a housing authority, or a unit of government, I think and then applying a deed restriction to it, it can't be developed as anything else. But to answer your question, the 6 lots that the city just recently took ownership of and deed restricted ourselves as affordable housing, when we offer that for a request for proposals, if we don't get any takers on it because they're not ready to proceed, we'll offer it again at a future time. And, I presume that we would have takers. There's been a couple organizations that have expressed interest. But once they get it, then your question of what's going to compel them to build it in the short term, I think that we don't have that trigger in the deed restriction, that it has to be developed with a certain period of time. But it can't change outside of the affordable housing program because of the deed restriction. So that essentially takes the value of it off the table for turning into market rate housing. Our hope is that our development partners will continue to seek funding, and having the land costs out of the equation will facilitate that development over other projects they might be looking at.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon. Brock, do you have a quick question before we move on?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm also really interested in that kind of land dedication topic, and I'd love to see if any other cities have examples of that as well. It sounds like a really good opportunity.
Yeah, I think if we had more time, I would have loved to hear from some of our other city representatives, and whether, like I said, you've kind of considered measures like Ashland's employed, and why they have or haven't been utilized. But unfortunately, we're just about out of time for today. Thanks again to our guest speakers. Really appreciate all that you shared and help as this group works to look at rules and guidance that might help jurisdictions going forward. Our next meeting is December 3rd, so I hope everyone notes that it's on a Tuesday instead of Thursday, December 5th, because I think there is a LCDC hearing on some of the other rules during that time. Karen, do you want to share a little bit about what we might be talking about next time, and any other Miro board or other considerations that we want our folks to walk away from today's meeting with?
Yeah, we have 2 more meetings in the month of December, and we'll focus in on UGB exchanges, so those land swaps. Got a lot of land out there that's not developing, and for a variety of different reasons. We'll look at those rules that govern that. But we can continue touching on annexations. We can venture into growth management agreements, so your UGMAs, that also govern some of the annexation procedures. And I think, one of our big takeaways from the last 2 meetings we had is, what are the challenges and barriers to higher density and affordability in these expansion areas? What have expansion areas looked like in the past? What do we want them to look like in the future? And I think hearing from a public housing authority, hearing from a nonprofit builder, hearing from a city that has a lot of precedence, a lot of experience of trying different things and watching it evolve, and the experience they've had where they've shifted and changed. In the context of all of our cities will be coming up with their housing production strategies, those cities that are above 10,000. And what are these strategies that they can utilize when they need a UGB amendment? And even smaller cities, Sisters isn't required to do many of the things that they've chosen to do because they realize the value of housing mixed income communities throughout their city. So I think that's the takeaway I was hoping that folks could ground themselves in as we really dig into rules for UGB amendments and rules that support complete neighborhoods, our production strategies that are guided by the rules for providing needed housing, including affordable housing. So that's the plan for December. That's where we're at right now. The mural board is open. We'll keep it open throughout all of next week, I think. Go ahead and add there. And then we, for the first time, will do kind of a really broad stroke overview with the RAC. So our Rules Advisory Committee will meet on December 9th, and they will primarily be focused on what have you all been doing in the CowTac? We've updated them monthly at a very brief, high level, but we'll give them a much broader overview and scope of the discussions here. So we have that to look forward to with our Rules Advisory Committee.
And with that, then, thanks everyone. I hope you have a safe and happy Thanksgiving, and we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.